There are some stories that don't just make headlines. They reach back through centuries and pull out the truth that powerful people spent generations trying to bury. This is one of those stories. It is not a story that begins in a palace or ends with a press release. It begins in a port city in India in the early 1800s with a woman whose name was nearly erased from history on purpose. It ends with Princess Catherine of Wales sitting with a piece of paper in her hands, reading something that would quietly shift the way she understood the family she had married into, and the legacy she had agreed to carry forward. To understand what that paper said, and why it shook something deep inside the walls of Kensington Palace, you have to go back almost 200 years. You have to go to Surat. Surat in the early 19th century was one of the busiest port cities in the world. It sat on the western coast of India, along a stretch of the Arabian Sea, and it was the kind of place where merchants from Scotland, Armenia, and the subcontinent moved in and out with the tides. The East India Company had its people there, traders, clerks, agents, men sent from Britain to manage the flow of goods and power through one of the most valuable colonies the empire had ever touched. One of those men was Theodore Forbes. He was Scottish, he was young, he was ambitious, and in Surat he met a woman named Eliza Kewark. Eliza Kewark was not British, she was not European. Historical records described her origin in vague, deliberate terms over the years, sometimes as Armenian, sometimes as simply local. The real answer, as DNA science would eventually confirm nearly 200 years later, was that Eliza Kewark was Indian, at the very least half Indian through her mother's line, carrying a mitochondrial DNA profile so rare it had only ever been found in 13 other people in India and one person from Nepal. She was a woman of the subcontinent, living and working in Surat during one of the most racially stratified eras in British colonial history. And for a time, she was the partner of Theodore Forbes. They had a daughter together. Her name was Catherine. And this is where the story gets both extraordinary and deeply painful, because what Theodore Forbes did next tells you everything about how the world worked in 1820. When he died, returning to Britain on a ship, never making it home, he left behind a will. In that will, he referred to Eliza Kewark not as his partner, not as the mother of his child, but as his housekeeper. He called her the purported mother of their daughter Catherine. He sent Catherine to live in Britain at the age of 6, separating her from Eliza, erasing the Indian half of her identity with the stroke of a pen. Eliza Kewark stayed behind in India. She wrote letters to Forbes, which researchers later found, letters that suggest she knew she was being abandoned, and that her race was the reason. Catherine grew up in Britain. She married. She had children. Her children had children. And through that chain of daughters, Catherine to Jane, Jane to Ruth, Ruth to another Ruth, that Ruth to Frances, the bloodline moved quietly forward through British aristocracy, never publicly acknowledged, deliberately obscured, carrying within it a mitochondrial signature that no one in power wanted to talk about. Frances Shand Kidd was born from that line. And Frances Shand Kidd became the mother of Diana Frances Spencer, the woman the world would one day call Princess Diana. Diana is descended from not one but 2 illegitimate children of King Charles II of England, via 2 of her great-grandmothers. That fact alone had always made her lineage more complicated than the fairy-tale wedding of 1981 suggested. But the Indian connection, the Eliza Kewark thread, was something else entirely. It was not just complicated. It had been actively suppressed. During the colonial era, many British families reshaped their narratives to align with rising social expectations at home, and when families pursued elite status, they often minimized colonial ties that complicated their image. The Spencer family, like many aristocratic families with East India Company connections, had done exactly that. Eliza Kewark had been written out of the story. Her daughter was sent away from her. The Indian bloodline was quietly reclassified as Armenian, a European-adjacent identity that caused far less social disruption. Find my past collective spark. It worked for almost 2 centuries, it worked. Nobody questioned it. Nobody had the tools to question it. But then science arrived. In June 2013, a Scottish genetic ancestry testing company called Britain's DNA announced something that sent a ripple through the British establishment. Scientists used saliva samples from 2 unnamed members of the royal family and traced mitochondrial DNA back 7 generations to Eliza Kewark, who was born around 1790. Kewark's mtDNA was so rare that it had only been found in 14 other people, all but one of whom was Indian, the other Nepali. Scientists confirmed that Prince William had not only inherited a small proportion of Indian DNA from Eliza Kewark, but that her heirs would also carry it. The woman Theodore Forbes had called a housekeeper, the woman whose daughter had been taken from her and shipped to England, the woman whose identity had been reclassified for social convenience. She had left a biological mark on the heir to the British throne that no document could erase. WHAS. The discovery meant that Prince William and his brother Harry both had a clear genetic link to Indian ancestry. Eliza Kewark had an incredibly rare form of mitochondrial DNA passed down through her female line, a form found only in people from the Indian subcontinent. The line was unbroken. Diana had carried it. William carried it. And William's children, George, Charlotte, Louis, carry it too. Which means that Princess Catherine of Wales, the woman who will one day be queen consort, raised 3 children who are quietly, genetically, undeniably, connected to a woman from Surat who was abandoned by a Scottish merchant in 1820 and erased from the story. Channel 4. When this DNA confirmation became widely reported and Catherine encountered the full depth of what it meant, those close to the family described a reaction that was neither dramatic nor dismissive. It was something quieter and more lasting than either of those things. By all accounts, Catherine absorbed the information with the same careful, considered quality she has brought to every dimension of her role. But those who know her well say it moved her. Not because it was shocking. Catherine is not a woman easily shocked, but because it was human. Because behind the marble and the protocol and the centuries of official portraits, there was a real woman in India who had loved someone, had a child, and was written out of that child's life because of what she looked like. And that woman's blood ran in the veins of Catherine's children. What Catherine is said to have reflected on most was Diana herself. Diana, who had always been drawn to India in a way that seemed almost inexplicable. Diana, who sat alone outside the Taj Mahal in 1992 in one of the most photographed moments of the 20th century. A woman alone in front of the great monument of love, in the country that her own bloodline quietly connected her to. Nobody knew then what the DNA would later confirm. But looking back, people who loved Diana said it felt like something more than coincidence, like some part of her recognized something in that country that she couldn't name. Princess Diana symbolized compassion, openness, and global humanitarian outreach, and learning about her deeper ancestral roots adds meaningful dimension to her story. Moreover, Prince William's confirmed Indian ancestry highlights the monarchy's connection to the wider world. Rather than contradicting tradition, this discovery strengthens the institution's modern relevance. This is the framing that Catherine has reportedly embraced most fully. Not as a scandal to be managed or a secret to be suppressed, but as a truth that actually deepens the meaning of everything Diana stood for. A woman of the people who happened to carry the blood of the people in ways no one had admitted. Collective spark. The question of how the royal family officially responds to this kind of revelation is always delicate. They do not hold press conferences about ancestry. They do not issue statements about DNA, but behavior speaks. And in the years since the Britain's DNA findings became public knowledge, those watching the royal family closely noted something shifting in how Catherine and William approached their engagement with South Asia and with Britain's multicultural present. It is not something that is announced. It is something that is lived. In the conversations Catherine initiates, in the causes she chooses to champion, in the way she has built her public identity around empathy and early childhood, and the invisible lives of ordinary people. Observers say they see a woman who has absorbed a more complex understanding of the family she married into than the official portraits would suggest. There is also the matter of what this means for George. Great Britain will one day have a monarch with Indian blood, and the Commonwealth will be led by a king with a clear genetic link to its most populous nation. This is not a metaphor. It is a biological fact. The future King of England carries in his cells a connection to Surat, to Eliza Kewark, to a colonial love story that ended in abandonment and erasure, and somehow improbably survived anyway. The DNA did not cooperate with the cover-up. It traveled through daughters, through Frances, through Diana, through William, into George, Charlotte, and Louis, arriving in the 21st century as undeniable evidence that history is never as clean as the people who write it would like it to be. WHAS. DNA researchers widely believe Princess Diana had a matrilineal ancestor in Eliza Kewark, who was Indian, or of Armenian and Indian descent, making Princess Diana of roughly 1/64th to 1/128th Indian ancestry. That fraction sounds small until you think about what it represents, not a percentage, but a person. A real woman. Eliza Kework, whose name Theodore Forbes removed from the story of his own daughter's life, has now been restored. Not by a king, not by an official decree, not by a palace press office, but by science, by the truth written into the human body that no erasure can fully reach. Ethnic celebs. Catherine understands this better than most people might expect. She came into the royal family as an outsider. She was not aristocratic in the traditional sense. She did not come from a line of earls. She was Catherine Middleton from Berkshire, the daughter of a flight attendant and a former pilot who built a successful business. A woman who earned her place in the palace through nothing other than who she was and how she loved. She knows what it feels like to be measured against an institution and found complicated. She knows what it is to carry something quietly that the world around you doesn't fully see. When she learned the full weight of what Eliza Kework's story meant, the suppression, the reclassification, the erasure of an entire woman from her own daughter's official identity, those who know Catherine say she sat with it for a long time. She didn't perform a reaction. She let it land. What landed, by all accounts, was something close to grief and something close to pride in equal measure. Grief for Eliza Kework, who deserved better from the man who made her invisible. Grief for all the women across history whose identities were reclassified, simplified, erased so that the families they gave life to could present themselves as something more palatable to the powers of their era. And pride, quiet, steady pride, that the truth found its way through anyway. That Diana, who felt something pull her toward India her entire life, was connected to it in a way that went deeper than politics or charity. That William and their children carry something real and human and global in their blood. Something that pushes against the idea that royalty is narrow and pure and contained. For generations, historians reduced Eliza Kework to a brief genealogical note. Now, scientific evidence has restored her visibility and significance. The revelation underscores a powerful truth. Identity rarely fits into narrow definitions. Even royal bloodlines reflect centuries of migration, exchange, and human connection. Collective spark. This is what the DNA test ultimately revealed. Not a scandal, not a crisis, not the kind of secret that tears institutions apart. Something more quietly devastating and more quietly beautiful than that. It revealed that a woman named Eliza Kework, abandoned in Surat in 1820, erased from her own child's birth story, reclassified as something she was not, never really disappeared. She survived in the only way that cannot be legislated or rewritten or buried in a will. She survived in the body. She survived in the blood. She survived in the mitochondrial signature carried by the future King of England, the Princess of Wales, and 3 children who are growing up in Kensington Palace with no idea, yet that somewhere in their cells is the memory of a port city in India, and a woman who loved someone who did not love her back the way she deserved. Princess Catherine knows, and those who have seen her in the moments since this knowledge settled into her, not the public Catherine, not the woman in the photographs with the perfect smile, but the Catherine who sits quietly and thinks, say that she holds it gently. The way you hold something that is both heavy and precious. The way you hold something that belongs not just to you, but to the children you are raising, the children who will one day be told who they are and where they came from, and who, if they are lucky, will be told all of it. The full story, not the sanitized version, the true one. The one that begins with a woman named Eliza Kework in Surat in 1820 and has not ended yet.